All right, welcome to Shop Talks, which is a production of Impressions, the show here, and they have a magazine, and InKitchen.com, where I'm from, which is a free online information source. Thanks to our sponsors, Los Angeles Apparel, Alpha Broder, Lane 7, Stalls, SPSI, and Transfer Express. With me, I have Dave Connor from Transfer Express, and Alyx Spurrier, a freelance artist who's been working in the field for a long time. And we're going to talk about creating artwork for t-shirts. I got to say that the main reason I'm doing this partly is I hate my customers that create art that's not for t-shirts and want me to put it on t-shirts. So the more information about what to think about for t-shirts and other garments is kind of important. All right, let's just start with maybe what are some of the things you want to think about when you're designing a shirt as opposed to like a Facebook spread or a billboard or just about anything else?
Off the bat, initially, you're a lot more limited when it comes to the real world color spectrum. So whereas on a social media post or something that you're going to see on a screen, you can have neon greens. It's going to shine super bright. You're limited to what you can actually print on a T-shirt. And with that too, you actually have limited backgrounds, specific shirt colors that you're limited to. So you kind of have to design around what you're working with, what colors you can actually produce on press. And, limited color counts. A lot of times companies will come to you wanting a outrageous design, but at the end of the day, they've got a budget for a 2 or 3 color shirt. So you really have to kind of think about those things up front to know what you're capable of producing, because we're on an iPhone screen or a laptop screen, the opportunities are kind of endless, but you're limited in so many ways with a garment decoration.
You mean just because you can put 47 blends in the thing on your screen really easily, you shouldn't do it on a t-shirt?
Yeah, I mean, with digital squeegees, it's a little more doable nowadays, but you're still not going to get the neon, fluorescent colors and all that stuff. So. And
then I notice in a lot of your work, you include the color grounds of the shirt, right? So you want to talk about that because that's really different than anything else probably. No one prints on red paper.
Right. Yeah. It's just, again, you gotta have your colorways in mind up front, right? Because if the client says, "Okay, make us a design," we don't know what color shirt it's going to go on yet, and you go off and you design a red and green design, or let's say a green and white design. And they wind up saying, "Okay, well, we want to put it on a red shirt." You just designed a Christmas shirt without even knowing it, right? So it's just, you kind of have to have all the elements in place before you start the design process to get the desired result.
Definitely a lot more planning, and I think you hit it on the head. The color, because with CMYK, and I mean Pantones are you got a plethora of colors out there, but just making sure that it's gonna jive with the color of the shirt. And that it's going to be, it's going to look good. I've seen gradients in even screen printing or direct-to-garment or even heat transfers now with direct-to-film. Like, it's raising that bar of what you could do. But, at my heart, I'm a plastisol guy. I want to see those coated Pantone inks and really have them shine on that shirt, for sure.
Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
That's absolutely right.
Absolutely correct, yeah.
I guess another thing I find, like when you're designing something, do you think of it on a person? Because it seems like a lot of people, they really love those mock-ups that are flat, and the front and the back relate to each other, even though usually you cannot see the front and the back of a person at once.
I think it's important to have a few different variations when visualizing a product, especially when you're going to print a lot of them. That way you can see it kind of how it's going to appear out in the wild, how it's going to wrap around the body. But also the flat lay is good for production purposes, knowing how big the print needs to be on a medium shirt.
Right, but that's like production instruction.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
not like really going to give the person a great idea of what it will look like on a person.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think as close as you could get it to how it's going to actually be photographed out in the wild. How it's going to look in a catalog, I think, is going to sell that design a lot more than just a flat shirt.
It definitely does. I mean, when you're talking like full width or something, and people aren't understanding, like when you get to the edge here, when you're going 15, 16 inches wide, that's not visible if you're at a 3/4 or turned, and it's going to be there. There's so much that when you get that flat lay, now I'm going to be a sucker for aesthetics, and that's my designer coming out in me, that when you have all those flat lay shirts on a storefront, they just look so nice. But I mean, when you're talking about selling anything online, especially t-shirts, like people want to see how it's going to fit and feel on you, and when you're designing that graphic, you want to know exactly where it's going to be, not just the extra 4 inches of fabric that's actually on the side of my body. That's not on the front.
But I think the funniest thing I ever had, I've seen it a few times, but 2 examples. One was a beer company, and it had like a hand pointing at something, and it was for women's shirts, and it was right like this. And I was like, is that a purpose? And they're like, oh my God. Like, they had not thought of that. And another time it was like circles right there. Really, really bad look. They had not thought of it at all. And both times they were horrified that it almost went, to press. They had sent me the artwork. You do have to think of a human form.
Yeah, and a lot of times, too, there is kind of a specific recipe for if you have text on a shirt. You'd rather it, if it's for a men's brand, rather it be on your chest and bold and kind of sitting here rather than a belly print.
The beer belly look is not popular.
People, you don't want to be looking down and seeing your brand across somebody's.
I don't have the
gut.
flattering form, so I hate those kinds of shirts. It highlights the worst in me.
So what other kind of things do you think of, like, if you're doing a project for somebody and it involves a T-shirt and other things, how is the T-shirt different?
The T-shirt specifically for the print quality, I think you always want to go with the ring spun. I want to go for the smoothest print, so people actually want to wear it out in public. A thin print, and also I like looking at it and saying, okay, they got a budget for 3 colors, but how can we use halftones? How can we do different types of techniques to actually maybe make it look like it's a 5 or 6 color with a limited color palette? I think that just makes me happy inside to be able to pull that off.
I think you touched on it too, like when you said thin print, designing with that negative space as a color or as an element in the design is so important, because, I mean, other than soft hand, let's say soft hand screen printing, discharge printing, where you're not going to have that hand feel, any other way that you're putting ink on a substrate, you're covering up those fibers. It's not breathable. It's not going to be comfortable to wear. So when you're thinking of your design and planning this design, you want it to be a shirt that people are going to want to wear and keep around and not be uncomfortable. So when you're wearing that 15 by 20, I mean, I come from a print shop that was like death metal shirts all day, every day, that were full solid ink coverage, 12 colors, and like, man, some of those were just straight bulletproof vests that you're wearing.
And sometimes I remember an example of that is we actually had, I think it was a Mavs 5K or something we were doing a design for, and they wanted a design that it was kind of like a big block print. And I'm like, man, you're gonna be sweating under that big plastisol block. So we wound up, thinking about how we could get it to breathe a little better, and actually implemented the jersey texture in the design, so that there's actually gaps in between that block, so that airflow can actually go through that shirt. So
I think distressing too. I mean, maybe not so much. That vintage retro vibe might not be as popular as it was.
That's still pretty popular.
Still pretty popular.
There's a lot of it.
And it's certainly popular with printers. It hides a lot of errors.
Yes, to try to get, just break up that space. But yeah, that jersey texture, or even like there's that denim texture you see all the time. That kind of, and even like the way that your artwork actually does shading. If you're unfamiliar with Alyx's work, you got to look it up. But the way that you use that shading and the stippling of the color to break it up while you still get that gradient. Or I mean, like, yeah, we live and die by halftones, so just exploiting that and stylizing it too.
It doesn't seem like a lot of these things don't. there's not a simple answer. I noticed that you just designed some things for Farm Aid, which were really great and worked out well. They sold like crazy. But if you're doing a tone-on-tone, you can have it a little bigger, right? I noticed that the design you did that was tonal, you could pull off a large image that if it had been a contrast image, I don't know, do you think about that when you're designing?
Well, you are dealing with less contrast since it's tone on tone. So if you can get away with cheating a little bit and blowing it up a little bigger, that way it's a little more eye-catching. And if it was a big solid block of white ink, it would be a little too much. So
you get that visual weight, and I even found when you're planning like the placement of it, that matters too. If you have, say, I just think of like a shirt that we did for our pro day a couple days ago, that I sometimes, even though I'm not necessarily in the creative field every single day, every morning, I like to flex my creativity, but where it's a half-toned image behind, it was a black shirt, blue and white print. The blue is a half-toned image, and the white was super bold, that you have that high contrast, where even then you put the placement up where the blue is higher right on the collar. So it wasn't that 1.5 to 3 inches down from the collar. That blue is on the collar, but where the white started, and that visual weight, that when you see it from a distance, your brain just processes it as like, that's in the right spot. Whereas if I would have started that design even 3 inches down from the collar, that's a belly print then.
And I think that brings up a good point too. As I like to think that it needs to be, you need to be able to catch somebody's eye from, 30 yards away at least. So.
Yeah, it's funny. We do the art for Farm Aid, and you did some of the designs. I'm always telling the customer, they're not looking at it like this. They're looking across the booth, and it has to read on the backdrop there. And then a lot of times with customers, they don't seem to get that idea that, if you have some type that you have to come up and invade their personal space, that's probably not going to work.
That plays a good part too, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because when you're thinking, what is the purpose of this shirt? When you're designing it, if it is like a promotional shirt, 5K or something, you want that big, bright, bold. But when you're doing something more for a clothing brand, or you're doing those super popular, subtle, minimalist prints, or like a left chest, or just little tiny additional branding, you could get away with a little bit more tonal, tone-on-tone, like even intricate, or designs that like you are meant to be a little bit more, close up and intimate. Like I was just talking to my class, like the placements on the sleeves. And during the pandemic, this shifted where like the text faced the wearer. And it was like these little positive messages as you're sitting there working from home. You don't deal with anybody any day, and you just don't see other people. That why make the print for them? Make it for you.
You touched on it a little bit, but what do you think of in terms of where you put the elements of your design on like a front?
I think depending on the, if it's streetwear, obviously a lot of times they have a message that goes along with it, or they're putting Nike across the chest pretty big. But going back to your point,
the top.
Yeah.
The important stuff's at the top,
at the
right?
top,
Not at the bottom.
and then you have kind of a central lockup, and then you might have some details kind of wrapping on the bottom of it, or just kind of sprinkled in the design. But it kind of changes with who you're designing for, what you're designing for. I think a lot of bands, too, off the bat, or skate brands. I do a lot of stuff with skate brands, and they're more concerned with just the image representing their culture. So they might just want a little tag on it, and then the logo kind of woven into it subtly. So I think it comes down to the style that you're designing for a lot of the times.
I like the style, the culture, like the relatability. Like I was talking about it last night and kind of envisioning like what we were going to talk about for this. But like if you really think about it, the most accessible art out there, like not everybody has a Monet on their wall. Everybody has art and like an expertly designed T-shirt. So it is by far, like everybody's an art collector. It's just on fabric that we relate with, and we feel personable enough to let it represent us when we go out in public too. Like that's powerful.
Well, this is funny that you said this. So we're hiring a new printer, and he's moving up from New York to Providence. And he said, I just love T-shirts. He goes, it's affordable art that everybody can afford. And I was like, all right, you'll be here Monday? Okay, great. Like, rarely do people get that. That is one of my main motivations, that I have always loved T-shirts. So it is affordable art. When it's good.
When it's good. And, it's exciting whenever a client will come along and they say, hey, just do your thing with it, have fun with it. And a lot of the times, those are the shirts that go on to sell the most whenever you just kind of entrust in an artist to do their thing and not dictate too much, you know, what the final results are, I think.
It's funny because t-shirt art, I think, is more difficult than some other art in some ways, yet it's not respected, i.e. people don't want to pay for it, right? I mean, it's funny. And I don't know, whenever we run into, like, you know, people that are expensive designers, then we get all this stupid shit that, like, oh, that's really creative that it goes over the shoulder. No one ever thought of that. You know, it's like they really creative and, you know, because they don't understand the process. They think and they don't see it out there. They think that's creative. Always around the damn side, you know, the front and the back, you know, it says God and damn on the back. Yeah, they think that's clever, but no one sees it. And like, he's going around with a t-shirt that says God, you know.
They think they're the first person coming up with that type of stuff, but it's just like, no, it just hasn't been printed like that for a reason.
Your art costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like those side prints, what was that, 2008, everything was the side print up there. We remember that?
Oh, what was that brand that just made everybody send us stupid art? Affliction. You know, they printed their stuff before it was made, you know, so they would want that, you know, they want a full print that goes to the edge of the sleeve. Yeah. And, you know, they want 72 shirts in, like, size extra small to 4X. So you're going to make, you know, all right, that's about 87 screens, I think.
That's not how it's going to work.
I don't think you're going to afford that. No, it's not going to work.
You don't have the budget for that.
It's not going to work. It's not going to work. So, any tips on tools? You know, I know some brands now, some of the distributors have, you know, a actual image of a person, or the shirts have a shadow in them, or they look more real instead of just the, you know, vector art. Is any of that stuff helpful to you?
I think designing, I actually usually just start with a blank t-shirt template on my artboard, just so I have a visual idea of where the graphic is going, how it's flowing, where the text is laid out. Because I found that if you start designing on a square, oftentimes you go to put that on a mock-up and it doesn't read the same, or you know, your text is too big here, or it's hanging off to the side too far, or it throws the whole shirt off balance. So I think, I mean, tools, I mean, I use Illustrator and Photoshop every day, like I feel like any designer does. Procreate, I love Procreate initially, getting ideas out there, and then kind of taking it into Illustrator, refining it down, and really dialing in what it's going to turn into.
Illustrator is bae, always and forever. Like those vector artwork, and like just being able to. I mean, you kind of touched on a little bit, like with printmaking being more accessible. Like it's not a fine art. It's because, like, I mean, when I was in art school, I was like, oh man, I'm gonna do some paintings and sell them, and like what they were worth to me wasn't what somebody else was worth. So like even using those, leveraging technology, you say Procreate, like when I was really getting in depth into this is t-shirt design, like that technology wasn't there, and it's so cool to have that technology and adapt to it, to the point where like I was doing gig posters as a large form of like designing, and I wanted to make them look lino cut, that like hatch show print style that was real popular, and so I would actually just take an Illustrator and just start carving away with that eraser and custom brushes, like to give it that lino cut look, and then even transferring that then to t-shirt artwork to like get that texture in there, so you're giving that negative space a little bit of life and using it as that second or third or fourth color in that design.
Actually, so you mentioned not starting with a square. That reminded me of just putting squares. Seems like a terrible idea in general. You know, like they don't want to stay square. They're not going to stay square after you wash the shirt, even if you got it perfect. They're super hard to print. It's just like a bad idea. It shows every irregularity. You know, a lot of times people give us art like that, and I'll be like, you know, human beings sewed the shirt, and it's not going to necessarily look square to the shirt in every way.
Yeah. And even when designing, say someone has they want a full-on print, it's a metal shirt or something. I'll start with the max print dimensions, and then have the shirt kind of scaled up beyond the dimensions of the artboard, and then I can just go ham inside of that and, you know, not put a solid border frame around it, because like you're saying, when you pull that shirt off a press, those lines are going to warp. It's going to be lopsided. You know, they'll all be unique, but the expectation would be, you know, I want a rectangle on the shirt, and all the, you know, that's not always the easiest thing to do on press. So.
Not at all, especially when like you're doing cotton and like they want that cheapish shirt. Like, oh, I'm going to do a 6-color print, but I'm going to cheap out on the cotton. You're like, it's going to shrink weird, man. Those organic shapes, definitely the way to go when you're like, if you have the control to be able to plan that and really design, nothing should ever be hard edges. Our bodies aren't hard edges. It's weird when like, I even think like screen printing platens are like hard edges. Like we're such, humans, if you really start thinking about us, we are so weirdly shaped. And T-shirts are so oddly shaped to fit our bodies. But yet, yeah.
A lot of stuff we get looks like it was designed for a piece of paper. You know, and that's just wrong.
And I will say too, I've had it happen to me where, you know, people pay good money for a design and then they cheap out on the quality of the shirt, and then you get fibrillation. You get
it's heartbreaking.
You know, it just, yeah, it really is, because you get it, you know, and then you're like, well, I wish this shirt was decent enough to want to put on every day and wear to sleep. You know, that's what I want to do.
And as an artist, you know the potential of it, and you saw it just get chopped off at the legs. Like,
you printed it on cardboard.
Yeah. Like an extra $1 per shirt would make a world of a difference here. Like, do it, man.
All right, well, maybe some questions. Any questions about T-shirt design? Y'all designers, printers? Who of you are designers?
All right.
Any tips? You got any tips or a question? Okay.
Do y'all have any advice about running design as a shop? Because I run a screen print shop and we just don't do design. We just have people send us design because we found it's like really difficult, that process. Do you have advice about screen print shops interfacing with design?
All right, so the question is about if you're just a print shop that's not doing the designs, you're getting the work in, about how to interface with the designers out there.
So it's a tricky situation. It's how much that you could get into it. So I've worked for print shops that had in-house design agencies that cost way too much money and ate into that profitability. And as long as you're charging your customer accordingly, you're going to be able to profit. And you're leveraging SVG catalogs and really good designers to be able to, I don't want to say really good, because just maybe really efficient designers to be able to do that. By not allowing or partnering with a design, because maybe it isn't like bringing design in-house, but listing a list of local designers to you that you know have sent you like bitchin' artwork that you want to use. Have them, hey, we have this network of designers, these 4 or 5 designers, maybe one of them is going to be in your style, and then they're going to pitch more work to you as they get work too. So it's good to leverage that, or if you're bringing it in-house. But even the print shops that I've worked at that have either online design solutions that are pretty much SVG editable catalogs like we have at Transfer Express, it super lowers the bar, and having that ability to have somebody feel like they're in control and like, I customized this, I made this, when it was really something that you made because you knew it was going to print good, just takes all of the guesswork out of it. And it's a huge, it's a huge value proposition for us as Transfer Express too.
I think that in-house design for a print shop has a specific tier that you can work on, because if people are going to a print shop expecting design work, you're going to get stuff printed, not designed. So I think, if you have a few stock vector, accounts here and there that you can pull, stuff for high schools and, track meets and things like that, I think that you could easily throw that stuff together and make a profit from that. But whenever it gets into the more custom stuff, I think that oftentimes the client will be surprised at how much that actually costs to get done. So
that's kind of been our issue, where we're on Instagram, we're showing like amazing art that we're printing, and then people hit us up and they're like, we want this design, and we're like, that's $1,000, and they're wanting it for like $50, $100.
Then the sticker shock sets in, and they're like, well, I'm not even, the order of shirts is less than that, so that. But you know, the thing is, you're paying that much for a piece of artwork that you could potentially sell over and over and over again. That's why a lot of, you know, buddies that I have in bands and stuff, they're cool with, you know, paying that price because they know they're going to see that come back, and they can continue to print that same design over and over again for every show that they go to. So
I think you also. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I love bands because they do value that.
Yeah.
Like that is if it's a bad design, people aren't gonna buy it, and they're not making money, and that they're selling merch to make money. Album sales don't make what they used to. Spotify kills streaming. Like that is their source of revenue, so they like investing into it.
I think you have to right away also see what kind of range of volume they're going to do. You know, if they're going to do 72 shirts, you know, they can't afford a lot of art. If they're going to do thousands, maybe you do the art, you know, thousands of shirts and it's going to repeat. Hey, throw in the art, right? Just add 10 cents and you got $1,000 or something.
I would cap that off by just what makes sense. What makes sense for you and your business. As a freelance designer and an in-house designer, like saying no to things is so empowering, and I struggled with it for the longest time, and I was never more successful than when I learned to say no. That's not worth my time.
I think also if you're interacting with artists that are, you know, bound and determined just to send their art in, just give them a few of those basics. Try not to have a triangle, no borders, and use the shirt color, you know, especially the shirt color on black shirts, huge. Just that alone will save you so much. No one wants to print a giant rectangle of white ink. You got to tell them sometimes, you know what, I'll do what you want, but you're going to hate it. And I'm going to hate you, but
no
you don't say the second part, just the first part. All right, other questions about t-shirt art? Other advice that I didn't touch on here?
I would say just have fun with it. You know, I think that if you are the one doing the design work, if you're having fun with it, a lot of times that will translate to the final product. And people, you know, if I'm excited about something, I think that it translates, and I think people see that in the final result. So just have fun with it.
That's funny you say that. So it was big art firm that dealt with Hanes, that they're not there anymore, but that was their thing. T-shirts are supposed to be fun.
One of my favorite things, I mean, and from T-shirts especially, because there's a lot of involvement into it, and the cost of producing them is much higher than anything else, is communicate. So when you're designing with a customer in mind and they kind of give you some direction, it sucks to pour 2, 3, 4, 5 hours into something and then go, you kind of missed the mark, or that's not what I was thinking, or hey, this instead. So even if it's just like creating a mood board for them, if they go, because sometimes they go, hey man, love your style, just go have fun with it. And some of the times it's, man, this is fantastic, love it, take my money. And then other times it's like, so I was thinking more like specifically like this design that you did. And you're like, why didn't you just tell me that off the bat? So like just opening up maybe just that extra email that you like, if you think about it, touch base and maybe keep working, wait for their response, and then go, okay, I'm either on the mark or off the mark. And that's what helped me like at least be profitable doing it. And if you're integrating it into some kind of shop, you want that to be profitable and not suck any profits out of the actual work that you're screen printing them.
Yeah, it's the same thing with carpentry. Measure twice, cut once. You know, do your work up front. You know, spend 30 minutes, an hour, kind of looking at the possibilities before you start, you know, designing stuff. And it usually goes pretty well with that.
I don't know if either of you done this. Sometimes we kind of sell the designs, I would say. So with some of the bigger clients, the person paying the bill is not artistic at all. They're not out there. They don't know fashion. They don't know shit except how to gouge money out of people. But we would like convince them in a way, this is where this came, like you have to teach them where it comes from. So we're going to do these designs, and this is where it comes from, and show them maybe some street brands that are doing like a similar, you know, we don't steal stuff, but you know, it's in that vein. You know, there's a lot of things with numbers. You know, we did a whole series of 50 designs for a big mill, and you know, we had to kind of show them where it came from, and they're like, oh, because earlier time we had done stuff and they didn't get it, and they had us ruin it basically. So maybe with like your mood board or like just showing some examples
That
out there in the
inspiration.
world where the inspiration came from.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the times it is that too. You might do more research than the people that want the shirts, and they say, well, why is there a road runner on this? And it's just, oh, well, the town that you're doing the event in is known for road runners, and they have
Panthers.
Panthers, yeah. You're doing an event in Panther City, so that's why there's a panther on the shirt.
Other questions or comments?
Advice, experience.
Yeah, tell us something.
All right. Well, we're both going to hang around for a few minutes. I know some people prefer to just chat. So I want to thank the sponsors again, Impressions, Los Angeles Apparel, Alpha Broder, Stalls Transfer Express, SPSI, and Lane 7. And I want to thank Alex Spurrier and Dave Connor, and how about a hand for them?
Thank you guys for sitting around, hanging out. I appreciate you, Rick, for having us up. It's good
Yeah,
times.
thank you. Thank you guys. Let's go create some cool stuff, all right?
All right.